Good afternoon. If everyone can take their seats, please. My name is Amanda Sutcliffe-Jones, and I have the privilege of serving Sea Pines CSA as your Director of Communications. I'd like to welcome each of you to the 2019 Community Services Associates and Association of Sea Pines Plantation Property Owners annual meeting. And in addition to over 300 folks in the audience, we are also joined by 250 property owners via live webinar at this time. On behalf of both boards and the staff of CSA, I thank you for joining us. A few announcements before we begin our meeting. From a safety standpoint, in case of any emergency, please observe the illuminated fire exits around you. According to the meeting schedule, we cover ASPPPO's meeting first. Then we will adjourn that meeting. That meeting will be led by ASPPPO President Charlie Miner. Following the adjournment of the ASPPPO meeting, we will immediately move into the CSA meeting, led by CSA Chairman Mark Griffith. Following the adjournment of the CSA meeting, we will break for a question and answer session. Questions will be taken from the floor. If you're in person, we have the mics numbered. So mic 1 is right over here. Mic 2 is located in the center aisle. To ensure your question can be heard, please speak directly into the microphone so that the audience and the presenter can hear your questions. To those who are joining us via webinar, when we reach the question and answer session of our agendas, we will turn on the Ask a Question feature so you can type in your question. We'll go in order, 1 question, 2 question, and then a question from the webinar, and we'll circulate to be able to answer those questions. Following the question and answer session, a social hour will be held on the back patio area with some food and drink, so we encourage you to stay around for that afterwards. We do have a hard set time to exit the club by 6 p.m. this evening, and we do have to facilitate both the CSA and ASPPPO meeting as well as a social hour, so just please be aware of that. This completes my opening remarks, and at this time I'd like to welcome Charlie Miner, ASPPPO President, to the stage. Charlie?
Getting to the stage is part of the problem. I had ankle surgery. Welcome, glad to have you here. The first item of the ASPPPO board meeting is please silence your cell phone. Excellent. Paula Scanlon, do we have a quorum for the meeting? And do you have a motion for approving the minutes? Sure.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum, and I would like to call for approval of last year's minutes, please.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes. I'd like to announce the nominating committee for 2019. That is Charlie Miner, myself, Barry Barth, and Paula Scanlon. It has been our process with the ASPPPO nominating committee to nominate any eligible candidate who is an ASPPPO member and wishes to run. The next item on the agenda is to announce the record date for voting in next year's elections. Those elections are held in the fall of this year. You must be a member of ASPPPO as of October 1st, 2019 in order to vote. Okay. At this point in time, I'd also like to recognize our retiring board members. Beverly, are you here? Beverly Searle? I don't think so. Okay. Beverly Searle and Dave Borghese. I'm going to go a little out of order and also recognize a retiring CSA board member, Paul Crunkleton. If you would please, the two of you would please come up here for a moment. As you said, good comment. You can see who's retired and who isn't. And so we have a plaque to each of you in commemoration of your service. Okay, in appreciation of your service. CSA and ASPO. We owe those gentlemen a lot. Returning board member, Barry Barth, and new board members, Paul Crunkleton, who's just joined the ASPO board, and Paula Scanlon. And that makes up now our full board. There we go. 9 members. This is my last year at ASPO. I'll miss it, at least most of it. After 6 years, I'm particularly proud of the great staff that we've assembled. Sandra Archer, Russell Fredericks, David Henderson, Amanda Sutcliffe-Jones, Toby McSwain, Victoria Shanahan, and of course, Brett Martin. They in turn have assembled an incredible staff under them. They proved themselves in a heroic response to Hurricane Matthew, and they have been performing stellar ever since. Like most of you, my experience has taught me the importance of having enough revenue to properly run a business. I guess that's true for any family or other enterprise. As president of ASPO, that has been my prime concern. On Friday, the CSA board approved the final terms of a referendum to provide needed funding. At noon today, ASPO approved the same resolution. Now we face the critical task of passing the referendum for all the good reasons you may have already heard and will soon hear more. It will be a shared responsibility of we as residents, as well as the resort and commercial interests. It is our Sea Pines. We're all in it together. Yes, there will be opposition. Last year, Stu Rodman and I reached out to the leadership of a group that calls itself the Alliance. We held several meetings, including Sea Pines Resort Alliance board members, including its founder, Greg Morris, and Dick Matthews, and other ASPO and CSA board members. Some of these meetings continued well into this year. Our goal was to find common ground and avoid the divisive rhetoric that has sought to divide our community. Unfortunately, we were not successful. And a couple of months ago, we discontinued further discussion. The Alliance vowed to fight this referendum if their demands were not met. In my opinion, their 2 pivotal demands were the percentage. I'm gonna put my glasses on so I can read this a little better. There we go. Their 2 pivotal demands were aimed at the resort. They were the resort assessment and the resort guests' free access to Sea Pines on weekly passes. If you look on social media, there are other complaints, and I'm sure the Alliance will add some, but based on our meetings with the Alliance, these were the main 2 points. These aren't new issues. Also, they are not part of this referendum, nor do I think they should be. Over 2 years ago, I led an ASPO team of Mark Griffith, Rich Spear, and Dan Westerbeck in a lengthy and detailed negotiation with the resort over their desire to expand the Inn at Harbortown. We explored these issues in depth and at considerable expense. We used Nexon Pruitt, LLC, and Denton's of Atlanta. As a result, I gained some special knowledge about these issues. I'd like to share that with you. First, the resort and its predecessor have paid an annual assessment of 0.5% of revenue. This has been the standard for almost 3 decades. Some argue that this is not fair and point to covenant language that suggests it should be 1%. They make a good point, and they have a credible argument. The resort, on the other hand, also has a credible argument for the 0.5%. That's the deal they made when they purchased Sea Pines almost 20 years ago, and they too have competent and reputable legal opinions to support their position. So who's right? We believe in the rule of law, and we could spend 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a court decide that question. There are those who, it would seem, would love an ugly fight and perhaps would like that approach. I don't. So we did what we both felt was reasonable. We split the difference. The resort agreed to pay to a 50% increase to 0.75%, and we agreed to put the issue to rest. However, that referendum was withdrawn, and so we really went nowhere with it. Today, the resort, which is owned by Riverstone Group, has said they are willing to increase their assessment to 0.75. Why? Because they recognize the need to fund our infrastructure. This is totally voluntary on their part. I think that is a real win-win for all of us as residents. It's time to resolve this, and this is a reasonable solution. The other issue, the resort's right to free access for the guests, was also tested. I believe that this is not only their right, but it was also a necessary prerequisite for the almost $200 million that they have invested inside our gates at no cost to residents. They would not have made this investment without solid assurance that their guests would have free access. The Alliance argued, well, they can simply pass it on to their guests without a problem. But then the Alliance hasn't invested a nickel in this community. Perhaps they think they know better than the resort how to run, or better than Riverstone how to run the resort. But I don't think the Goodwins would agree. We benefit immensely from the goodwill of the Goodwin family. They have funded facilities like the Harbortown Pier, that came at a price of $3 million, the Beach Club, the Plantation Club, the Golf Clubhouse, and 3 world-class golf courses that help distinguish Sea Pines as a premier community. They have done this with superb quality and attention to detail. Even the RBC heritage is here largely because of Riverstone's investment. We couldn't ask for a better partner, and we need to respect their rights. The Alliance doesn't agree. So I expect to see a barrage of emails, mailers, social media posts, and perhaps more videos from the Alliance, which are intended to derail this referendum. They are clever wordsmiths, and they will argue that it isn't fair and that you should vote no. They will push for failure, but to my knowledge, they have no backup plan. I've asked them that question several times. No answer. I wish it could have been avoided, but it isn't. We tried. I apologize for taking this time on such a negative subject. I believe my comments are accurate and that it's important for you to know the truth. That's what I told you. When you receive your ballots for this referendum, I hope you will vote yes. When fully implemented, the additional voted increase comes to $8.65 per week per household. That's a small price to pay for the future. We have a great team under Brett. I urge you to vote yes and support them. They're the people who saw us through Matthew and many other things since then. They won't disappoint you. Let's give them the resources they need to do the job for all of us. Vote yes. Thank you. I'd next like to introduce Rich Spear, who will give you the financial report. So we both make getting to up here exciting. Okay.
Two bad ankles and two officers. His had surgery. I just decided to step on Tabby. I do not recommend it. As all of you know or should know that are members of ASPPO, how many of you are members of ASPPO? Okay. How many of you are not members of ASPPO? Okay. $35 to get out of the room tonight. ASPPO is a voluntary organization. Our fees are capped by our bylaws at $35 a year. We're in the process of rewriting the bylaws and hopefully increasing it. I consider it by far the best $35 that I've spent. This is the single group that is responsible for protecting the rights of individual property owners. And the negotiation that was referred to earlier was supported by significant investments on the part of ASPPO from its reserves. If I can get the first slide up. Over the membership in, I need my glasses too. Membership in ASPPO has grown from 3659 3 years ago to 3808. It reverses a long-term trend where we're losing between 100 and 200 members per year. A lot of this increase was driven by all the conversation that's been going on for some time relative to referendum and the efforts on a lot of residents' behalf to increase it. But we still only represent about 2/3 of the property owners. A third are not members. So those of you that raise your hands, $35 and you can leave the room. But it is an important aspect, and the annual fees are something we're looking at because the total, next slide. The total revenues we raise are between $122,000 and $137,000 a year. Unfortunately, the things that people want us to do basically total anywhere from several $100,000 to several $1 million that they'd like ASPPO to do. But ASPPO's total budget's $137,000 a year. And as you can see, our expenses run about 129 to 133. The largest expenses really occurred is a part of the effort to look at legal rights and whatnot that you heard Charlie refer to earlier. In that case, we lost $61,000 in 2017 as a result of that. Next slide. Oops, back one, sorry. Not to get you caught in detail, but you can look at it in the annual report. But basically a third of our expenses, a third of that 133 roughly over years is spent on legal expenses. About 20% then each is spent on things like land use monitor, printing and materials, and related kinds of costs that you see broken out here. So it's run as a very lean operation. Our administrative is a contract we have with CSA to provide us with services that costs us about $20,000 a year, far less than we could afford to do if somebody were trying to create an independent staff for ASPPO. It's been a very cost efficient but fair effort on our part. Next slide. So at the end of the day, we had in 2016 net investable assets of around $400,000. Most of it invested in securities with a varying ladder of maturity that you would expect. That has decreased to about $344,000 this year. Really, its decrease is driven by the expenses obviously exceeding revenues, and in 17 the higher expenses we had around legal related issues. But overall, right now we have a reserve of around $344,000 in investments, and as you can see, our liabilities are fairly modest at this point. The messages as treasurer, I'd say, is I think that the $137,000, $133,000 we spend per year is well spent, but it is too little. I think we need to be able to raise another $50,000 to $100,000 so that we can build our reserves up. The reserves are what provide us with the ability to represent the property owners in various situations. Without that capability, then we are significantly limited in our ability to fulfill that obligation. I'll be happy to answer any questions when we get to the Q&A or afterwards if you'd like them. With that, I'd like to ask for adjournment of the ASPPO annual meeting. Can I get somebody to second? All in favor? And I'd like to introduce our president, Mark Griffith, for CSA. Mark?
No, don't do that. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the nearly 600 residents who have taken their time this afternoon to join us either in person or by webinar. I think it's probably the largest attendance we've had, at least in my now 6 years on this board. I'd like to call to order, consistent with our governance documents, the 2019 annual meeting of the Community Service Associates. Carolyn Adams, could I confirm that we either have in person or by proxy a quorum? Thank you. Our first order of business is approval of our minutes from the April 30th, 2018 meeting. The minutes were published previously in our annual report and posted on our website. May I have such a motion to approve? And a second? Are there any comments? Discussion? Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. I'd also like to announce the record date for the 2019 fall election of officers. Again, October 1 of 19. The 2019 Nominating Committee and its chairman for selecting candidates for open Class A residential board seats. Michael Tucker is chairman. The committee is served by Barry Barth, Stu Rodman, and myself, Mark Griffith. There are 3 directors standing for election this year. Positions currently served by myself, Charlie Miner, and Michael Tucker. These 3 seats, when elected, will serve January 1, 2020 through December 31 of 22. The 2019 Nominating Committee and its chairman for the Class B commercial board seats is Don Sigmund. The committee also consists of Bob Sowers and Mark Griffith. The Class B director seat standing for election this fall is currently served by Mark King. Should you be interested in standing for election, please submit your resumes and your credentials to the nominating committee at the CSA Administration Building prior to August 1, 2019. It is also possible to be a candidate by petition rather than being nominated. A petition for Class A requires 50 signatures of residential property owners and is required to be delivered to the CSA offices by October 1 of 2019. Commercial candidates may also petition a position on the ballot. That requires 3 commercial owners' signatures on a petition. Both of these petition forms are available at the CSA administrative offices. Interviews will be held in August and September, followed by a Meet the Candidates in October. Ballots will be mailed November 1st of 2019. Results will be available in mid-December. We have, as you're aware, 2 board members leaving the board this last election, Dave Borghese and Paul Crunkleton. David and Paul have been important board members. David serving as our treasurer and chairman of the finance committee, and Paul chairing several task forces, including representing CSA on the town Circle to Circle committee. We appreciate David and Paul's commitment to the community and thank them for their service. This past fall, re-elected or newly elected Class A members Barry Barth, Larry Moshvan, and Rich Spear. Newly elected or re-elected Class B members were Bob Sowers and Jim Caskey. Congratulations to all 5 of you. Our 2019 CSA board, consisting of 17 members, are indicated here on the slide. I'll call it by name if you'll stand up a minute and let the audience recognize you. Barry Barth, I know Barry's, I think, out overseas. Myself, Bill Johnson, Charles Miner, Larry Mobshin, J.R. Richardson Jr., Stu Rodman, Rich Spear, and Michael Tucker. Our Class B directors are Jim Caskey, Mark King, Don Sigmund, and Bob Sowers. Representing Sea Pines Resort is Carolyn Adams, Steve Birdwell, Carrie Corbett, and Scott Richardson. Thank you all. The 2019 CSA Executive Committee, which I chair, the members are Michael Tucker, Vice Chairman, Charlie Miner, ASPO President, Stu Rodman, our Treasurer, Carolyn Adams, our Secretary, and Don Sigmund, appointed as CSA Member at Large. As well, there are 14 standing committees. They're listed here. I'm not going to go through every one of them. This is posted on our Sea Pines Living website. But as you can see, it's a substantial committee and a substantial group of committees and a substantial commitment by this board. Thank you all. It's okay. As with Charlie, before I conclude, I'd like to recognize the CSA administrative staff, which I continue to believe is the best on this island, if not in the Southeast. It's a tremendous team. Brett, Victoria, Toby, Russell, and all your teams, we greatly are appreciative of your commitment to the community. Thank you. Thank you. Finally, it might be appropriate that we talk about goals and objectives we discussed at our previous meetings. First objective added this past year was to conclude and approve an agreement to increase the daily gate fee. We successfully completed that. We entered into a new agreement in late July of 2018 that became effective on August 1st of last year. This increased the daily gate fee from $6 to $8 and provides a mechanism by which over the coming years it can be increased to $10. The $2 increase alone through March 31 of 2019 has generated over $212,000 of additional revenue, net revenue, and is expected to deliver nearly $465,000 on an annual basis. Number two, complete and improve a new 2018 strategic plan. That too was completed. The new strategic plan was completed and approved by the board in May of 2018. Three, approve and initiate a referendum to fund the implementation of the 2018 strategic plan. As Charlie has mentioned, that's now been approved by both the CSA boards, the ASPO boards, and the resort. And you will see ballots mailed mid-May. Brett is going to do a detailed presentation once I conclude to share with you what's next in terms of that referendum. We're an aging community that requires asset replacement and repair, as well as a higher standard of care. It is critical that we support this referendum. There were several other goals that we set out previous, and I'd like to also comment on those. One, evaluate our gate functionality and develop a plan to improve access to the community. This has been completed. The gallery shops was purchased in 2018 to be utilized as a site for construction of a remote pass office. Site planning is complete. Architectural firms have been engaged to generate concept plans. And once this critical needs referendum is approved, we will engage an architectural firm and proceed with the development of that site. Number two, improve conditions of our waterways and lagoons. This is an ongoing maintenance objective. Progress has been made in this area. However, again, funding from this current critical needs referendum is key to allow us to continue to perform in that area. Four, raise the bar on the level of care of our entry corridors. This is also an ongoing task. Significant progress has been made with the improvement of Fraser Circle, with the rebuild of Greenwood Drive this past fall, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. Phase 2 of the Greenwood corridor all the way to Fraser Circle Lighthouse Road from South Sea Pines Drive to Harbortown, North and South Sea Pines Drive, all require the same sort of rebuild that we did on phase 1 of Greenwood Drive. Funding from this pending this referendum that we're talking about will provide the means by which we could do that over the coming several years. 5, work with the town to improve the Sea Pine Circle and Greenwood corridor to our main gate. As part of the Gallery Shops project, the Greenwood corridor, CSA owns that corridor, will be reworked from our main gate to the Sea Pine Circle. Acceleration lanes, deceleration lanes will be added, as well as some median and curb cuts will be closed to improve traffic flow. Plans have been developed and they've been preliminary reviewed with the town and the town's traffic engineers. Tom Lennox, who's sitting there with us today, has indicated to me that the town is well aware of the inadequacy and the failure of the Sea Pine Circle. Funding is the challenge. He tells me that he and the mayor and the council believe that in the near term, year or two, we'll find funding mechanism to take action to rebuild that circle. 6, work with the resort to help them with improvements for them to achieve their 5-star rating. This too is ongoing. Steve has told me recently that they had a Forbes travel guide analysis and they meet a higher percentage than most other 5-star resorts, but they don't provide all of the services that are required to qualify them as a 5-star resort. Did I get that right? Sort of. As you know, they withdrew their proposed expansion of the inn, as Charlie indicated, and a redevelopment of the waterfront. I expect that our critical needs referendum, once it's passed, will help prove to the Goodwin family that this community is behind the front door to their resort. I also think that once they had withdrawn their referendum to expand the resort, they announced about a $250 million project in Kiowa, and that is nearing completion. I don't know precisely when it will conclude, but it looked to me when I was up there this fall that it probably completes within the next year. So it's my hope that we pass this referendum and they complete their work at Kiowa, and they'll come back and refocus on Sea Pines. Stay tuned. There's much more to come as we move through the summer and the fall of 2019. As I mentioned before, the #1 priority in my mind for 2019 is to successfully pass a referendum that will allow us to properly maintain and service the infrastructure of this community. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure to represent you, and I look forward to 2019. I'm going to now turn the podium over to Stu Rodman, who is our treasurer and chairs the Finance Committee, to give you an update on our financial picture. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Nina and I have been property owners for 30 years here, and half of that time I've had the honor and pleasure of representing you at the county level, and now delighted to be involved at the at CSA also. A couple things. Let's look at our income statement as from a cash standpoint. And you can see last year we had a little over $11 million in expenditures, and you can see the percentage breakdowns of where those items were spent. And what really jumps out at me is that 20% projects. That's like capital maintenance, like repairing roads and other capital projects that we should be doing. Way too low for maintaining a plantation like we have here. The other one that's always been of interest to me on the right-hand side is where the money comes from, and what a high percentage actually comes from the gate entry, and therefore we as residents significantly reduces the amount that we have to pay. If you net those two numbers, we had about $500,000 of positive cash flow. And then, as Mark talked about, we ended up buying the Gallery of Shops, and that's a balance sheet transaction. So net cash was a little less than $1 million out the door. I think the Gallery of Shops was an extremely prudent investment. It will impact the gate, it'll impact the circle. It's hard to imagine that we could do the things that we need to do without having control of that. And it'd be a disaster if somebody else had come along and bought it and was going to put 30 or 40 shops in there. So anyway, well done. I've been extremely impressed with the dedication of the board that you have, and also the administration. They're extremely outstanding, and you have a very solid financial staff. Turning to the balance sheet, you can see what the numbers are there, but we basically have about $10 million in cash and cash equivalents, a little less than $9 million in fixed assets, and fairly nominal liabilities. And you have what we refer to as 43% of the required reserve. The reserve is looking out over a long period of time, and if you had to replace everything, you then say, okay, realistically, we ought to have 30 or 40% of that on hand as a reasonable reserve. We're currently running at 40%. So it's a good, solid, strong balance sheet that you have. The next item is looking in depth a little bit more at the gate fee. And I mentioned the gate entry, that I was kind of surprised that the amount of money that actually is generated for CSA from the gate entry. And the top line is the dollars over a 20-year period. The blue line, if you can't see it, is the amount that we spend on trolley related, and a couple other minor items. And the yellow is the amount of money from the gate entry that falls down to the bottom line for CSA. Currently, that's coming up on $5 million a year that is paid by others for the benefit of sea pines. That's totaled $60 million over the last 20 years, and as I said, coming up on $5 million a year. The last item, I'll talk a couple minutes myself on the referendum. And I think there's 3 referendums that we need to seriously address. Obviously, this one absolutely needs doing. Shame on us if we don't do it, and do it by a high margin. Secondly, as Mark mentioned, I think you'll see the resort come back and want to revisit getting the additional rooms that would make a lot of sense for sea pines. And then the third one would be to come back and visit the amenities that we seriously ought to consider to upgrade this. Michael Tucker has led the strategic planning. They've put together a good solid look at what we ought to be doing to really make this, I call it a 5-star residential community. That's not part of this referendum, but let's get this one behind us, then come back and see what we as a community really want to invest in. And if 75% of us agree that that makes sense, then we ought to do it. So those are the 3. Charlie gave a good overview of what has happened with the mediation with the Alliance. When we started that, there were actually 24 topics that were on the table. Some were clarifications, not all issues. One related to the trolley, and I should have mentioned it while I was talking about the trolley, but there's been some discussion about, well, should we do the revenue a little different, or is the expenses exactly where it should be, and so on. Reasonable things to talk about, but not part of what we ought to make part of the referendum. There's a governance issue that I think actually ASPPPO and the Alliance are probably reasonably close on, and that could come back as a future referendum or as part of one of the future ones. There were 2 items that were within the bailiwick, if you will, of CSA. One was the beach parking, or the parking and shuttle for the beach club, and the other was removing the transfer fee from this referendum. Those were the 2 items that CSA was in a position to do something with, and they addressed both of those issues. So that leaves a relatively small handful of items that the Alliance has from my perspective. And I think they would be well served, and I've recommended this to them, that they really ought to support this referendum and then bring those issues back when we get to the resorts referendum, because most of those issues are with them, not with CSA, and we don't need to burden this referendum with those particular issues. But anyway, looking at the final slide here, you know, we got $5 billion in values here in Sea Pines. What we're looking at in the deferred maintenance we need to catch up on is about $18 million. We're looking at about $3 million a year that we need to increase. And if you think about it, that's about 7/100ths of 1% of your property values. It's almost like not repairing your roof and hoping that it won't rain, which is kind of short-sighted. So I think we need to get this thing done. There's been no disagreement on the expenditures that need to be made. There's been suggestions on maybe you could tweak the revenue model this way or that way, but I think it's a good solid revenue model. And so we just need to get our house in order financially, get this passed. And the biggest single factor that you ought to be thinking about is property values. What we've seen on the island and what we're seeing in Hilton Head is that our property values are not coming back as fast as the rest of the nation in this recovery. And part of it is the fact that we're not taking care of deferred maintenance. So we need to get on with getting the deferred maintenance done. And then secondly, let's come back and take a look at whether we want to add some amenities. But that's not part of this. This is just purely playing catch up for what we should have been doing over a long period of time. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Brett Martin. I'm president of CSA, and wanted to come to you this afternoon and talk to you about the referendum surprise. Last Friday, we mailed out a brochure of information on the referendum. We sent it out to all of those eligible voters for a referendum to the 1974 covenants. I'm going to take you through that brochure and the information that's in it, and then talk a little bit about what we think you should be thinking about, or also give you some resources on where you can get additional information. So this is the brochure. We start off with construction, and then we go to what Sea Pines is. Trees, covered driveways, covered roadways. It's a beautiful place. I did a little introduction in the brochure. Most of you have probably received that. I think they dropped, a lot of them came into Sea Pines on Saturday. Other people have not received them that are being mailed throughout the country and overseas. Okay. What is this critical needs referendum? We try to talk through this and go through all of the components that we're really focused on. And why it's important to you. Because the value of your property is in jeopardy, because your lifestyle is at stake, because we've been kicking the can down the road, not necessarily intentionally, but out of a need and a lack of revenue. And because if we continue to wait, it's just going to cost more. Who benefits? You as a property owner, everyone who is a part of Sea Pines community, Hilton Head Island as a whole, and even the entire state of South Carolina. I had an opportunity to talk to elected officials and ask them to endorse what we were trying to do for Sea Pines. I also talked to Bill Miles at the Chamber of Commerce and Visitors and Convention Bureau about how important Sea Pines is to Hilton Head Island in the South Carolina. I got enthusiastic responses on all fronts about how important Sea Pines is. It was the place where Hilton Head Island started. It's the place where it continues to prosper with things like the RBC Heritage Tournament. We are noted We are recognized worldwide. I can talk to people in California about sea pines and they know who we are. We look at our conditions and we may not be what we want to be or what we think we have represented in the past. We want to be able to catch back up to that position. So what are the needs? Roadways, stormwater, landscaping, traffic and gate. Each of these components came to us through various methods, and we explained in detail in the brochure how we determined these were the critical needs. The first one, which was the gate, you told us. In our 2015 survey of property owners, you rated gate and traffic entrance as your primary concern. Secondly, right behind it was landscaping, in the deteriorating landscaping, and that was pre-Matthew. During that same time, we started looking at some other things. We were working with the town on stormwater funds. We saw easily how we were really falling behind in our stormwater. We had no plan to dredge our lagoons. We had no plan to replace pipes and control structures. We waited for the phone to ring. When something broke, we responded and went and fixed it. And that was our plan. Now we have a stormwater and hydrology study that tells us what our future looks like, and it isn't very good. We're overdue. We should have started long ago, but we never really recognized it, and now we have. And unfortunately, it's going to be a lot of money over a long period of time to get us back to the position that Sea Pines was intended to be in. And then finally, roadways. The condition of our roadways goes hand in hand with our landscaping and goes hand in hand with our stormwater. You know, when we rebuilt Greenwood Drive recently, we went and basically dug up all the pipes. When we were digging up all the pipes, we found that they were closed, corroded, falling apart. While we were in there digging those up and regrading some of the frontage roads, we found irrigation systems that had been abandoned years ago, simply because we didn't go back and do what we needed to do to maintain it and update it. How much will this cost? We've estimated the average cost over the next 7 years to be about $2.6 million per year. I know some of the references were to about 3 million. I think Stu said that, but right now we're trying to raise $2.6 million a year to do this work in these areas over 7 years, and then it will continue on. We don't know what inflation is going to be. We know our costs have risen faster than the CPI, and that's what we've been tied to. So we're going to need to address that, and we believe this is our best way forward, is to go forward with the referendum, get contributions, and get that behind us so that we can begin the work of improving Sea Pines. The new approved referendum terms recently approved by the resort, as well as CSA and ASPPPO this afternoon, include an annual assessment increase by the resort of 50%, going from 0.5 to 0.75 of their adjusted gross revenue. Sea Pines commercial contribution. Sea Pines commercial owners will commit to an annual assessment increase of more than 100% on behalf of their commercial tenants. So the tenants currently, through a gate agreement, are paying a fee for access. That fee has not changed since 1999. So first thing we're going to do is catch them up to what has happened with the residential assessment, and then move them forward with that residential assessment going forward. It has not been in the past an assessment. It's not in the covenants. It will now be part of the covenants and will require those folks that are renting businesses or the space for their businesses to pay an annual assessment to their owner, who will in turn submit that to CSA for funding. And then residents, $150 a year for 3 years as an increase, and then we return back to CPI. $90 for unimproved properties, a year, and then we return back to CPI. What does this generate? It generates $2.6 million a year. The amount we need, not more, not less, but what we need. We do have about 90,000 that we're setting into reserve funds based on our anticipation today. We're not sure if that's going to hold up as inflation goes forward, but we hope that it will. This positions the resort to make good contributions of about additional monies of this $2.6 million of about 8%. Currently, they pay about 4% of all assessments. So this new money will be at about an 8% contribution level. Okay. Property owners, residential property owners, will contribute about 92%, and the rest is borne by the commercial owners. So we're all in this together. Our community is 63 years old, and we need your support. We believe that this represents our best path forward. We have agreement, which is a requirement for a referendum of this nature. We have agreement from the resort to participate, and they have made the agreement with the commercial operators as well to participate in this manner. We're committed to caring for your property and maintaining our community. We serve no other purpose. CSA serves no other purpose than to promote, enhance, and protect the mutual interests of all owners of property in Sea Pines. In the brochure, as you go forward in it, we provided answers to questions. Last fall, we took a survey of property owners about the initial terms and asked you for your questions. We have a detailed timeline as well that illustrates all of the things that we've done, the studies that have been conducted, the surveys that we have taken, the presentations we have made, the solicitations for feedback that we have asked for. All of those are also found at our new website that's related to this. Okay, it's specifically a few pages for Sea Pines referendum. And where you look at the bottom on the timeline, you'll find a link you can click on that will take you to the presentation, the survey, the study, the information that you're looking for if you really want to dive deep. It's all there for you. So with that, I'd like to wrap up here. You know, I get a lot of emails, as you might imagine. I think Friday I got about 450 actually. But a lot of it was very positive. It was great to see. But, you know, I considered a few of them folks that had reviewed the brochure that I had sent out. And they were, you know, thinking I was too nice. They were thinking I was too positive about the whole position of this. It says, and the suggestion was made that I try to scare people. Well, I'm not here to scare you, but I certainly want you to understand what we're trying to accomplish. You know, this referendum is about the future of Sea Pines. Many have asked what happens if it doesn't pass. Well, we'll continue down the road. You know, we're going to keep moving. Life is not going to stop, but our disrepair, our deterioration, and our dysfunction, especially at the gates, will continue without changes, dramatic changes. Gate operations will continue to decline. More and longer waits will become more and more of the norm. We will all live with it or move on. For landscaping, as trees die and vines and weeds or other unwanted plant species take over, we will allow it because we won't be able to take it out. What grows will not be managed or maintained, but allowed. We will continue to respond with the most immediate remedy, not the most appropriate. As trees, plantings, and irrigation systems die and fail, we will remove them or abandon them. For stormwater, as lagoons fill in, banks erode, and pipes and control structures fail, water will stagnate and accumulate in places it should not be. Perhaps your driveway or your home will all see the results over time. Roadways and leisure trails will deteriorate. We will patch much more and not replace and renovate as our age would indicate we should. We will continue to have poor conditions, base failures, root intrusions, road edges worn off, potholes. If improvements are needed, we will simply overlay and do the minimum. We have to make choices between we will have to make choices between two lesser results, not the results we want. This will not happen all at once, but slowly over time, so much so that you might not notice, as some have not noticed today. If our future continues down its current path, we will allow the experience people get when they arrive in Sea Pines to convince them not to come back or tell their friends to visit, and certainly not buy a home. They have alternatives when they make a home buying decision. And so do all of us. This referendum gives us the chance to steward Sea Pines down the path to success or obscurity. This is what this referendum is really about. Staying relevant in a place where those with high aspirations want to be, or a place of disrepair, deterioration, and dysfunction, falling behind others. I personally hope it will be the former, not the latter. I hope you will join us and support this referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. And it's been a pleasure to spend the last 5 years with you and your team. And I'm also concerned that it'll be difficult for us to hold this team together. This guy's got a lot of passion. You can tell that from these comments. And there'll be easier tasks in more successful places that he might be than fighting the battle that he'll need to fight if we don't give him the proper funding. With that, I would accept a motion to adjourn. In a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. So, mic 1, mic 2, and then we have a webinar. We have at most 1 hour, and then we get to go outside for a little refreshment. Are there any questions? Sir, and please give us your name and your address in the community. Appreciate it.
My name's George Bombardier. I'm for everything you said that we need here. I'm all for resort and becoming a 5-star resort. I noticed in the book you got politicians to say how important it was for us to come and put up some money to do all this stuff, and that's great. But I'm wondering, did anybody bother to ask these politicians, if we're so important, we provide so much money to the state of South Carolina and Hilton Head, how come they can find funds to improve the traffic flow out of the gate? You know, George Jones had a song many years ago, I can't get the hell out of Texas. And oftentimes in the summer, I'm singing that song, only I substitute Sea Pines for Texas. That's all I have.
Well, as I said, I have recently had a discussion with Tom, and I know he's had a discussion with the mayor, today. And they don't have the town doesn't have currently the financial resources to fix that problem. And it's a problem that needs to be worked on with both the town and the State Department of Transportation. CSA owns the inner land of the circle, and we've expressed to the town and Steve Riley over the past years that we would be willing to cooperate in any way we could possibly cooperate to improve the outflow. But Tom and the mayor has said that they're committed to finding a mechanism which to achieve the funding to solve a problem that they're well aware of. So I don't know what more I can add or ask at this point. Yeah, ma'am.
Sheila Garvey, Sea Pines, Acorn Lane. I have a question about the trolley. My question is, who is going to be, is CSA now going to entirely pay for the trolley, its maintenance and the liability?
The trolley has been operated for what, Brett, the last 20 years. Early on, it was under a rental program paid for by some of the commercial interests. The then board didn't feel that it appropriate to have a private operator running a trolley system on our private roads, and agreed with the commercial interests and the then resort, I guess it was the Sea Pines Associates back then, that we'd raise the gate fee and the CSA would assume responsibility for operating the trolley. And that's the way it has existed ever since. So yes, CSA has the full responsibility to operate and fund the trolley operation.
Let me ask a question. How many people in this area right now have ridden on the trolley? Not that many.
Well, let me make this comment for those of you that refuse to understand. The gate fee back then was $3, if I'm correct. When that was increased to $5, today that $2 increase generates about $1 million a year. The trolley costs us less than $500,000 a year. So on a net basis, the CSA is benefiting from operating the trolley by nearly $500,000, regardless of who's riding it. Next. Wow, you guys must be in a big hurry to have some refreshments.
Question from the webinar. What services does the resort need to add to become 5-star?
Steve, you want to take that one on, since if I misstated, you correct me?
Oh, she had a mic, Steve. You want to stand a little closer to the stage?
Good afternoon. There's a number of things that are needed in order to obtain 5-star status from Forbes Travel Guide. One of the primary issues is the inn is what is evaluated by Forbes, and the inn was built with limited services. So we have we don't have a kitchen of all things. So the room service is a challenge. And 5-star requires 24-hour room service. So that's a bit of a challenge when you don't have a kitchen in order to do the room service. There's some limitations like that. The service itself, in our latest evaluation, we far exceeded 5-star standards, and the staff did a tremendous job, continuing to do a tremendous job. We scored the highest score that we've ever scored, way above any standard 5-star rating. So it's really facility related, and those are the things that we have to address.
Thanks, Steve. Did you have a question, sir?
Claude Conrad, 18 Sand Fiddler. Charlie mentioned the investment that the resort had made, and here, and that's for the benefit of the good ones, not us. Okay? The great brochure put together.
Thank you.
There's one question out of all of them that wasn't answered. On page 29, why can't Sea Pines Resort pay more? Just wondered why that wasn't answered.
Thank you. It was answered. If I'm not mistaken, Charlie answered that question. Webinar?
Thank you, Claude. The answer to that question is complicated in a way, in that you might say we really don't need the RBC heritage here. We really don't need these nice golf courses. We really don't, as residents, care whether or not we have these fine restaurants. It's all for the Goodwin family. Well, if it was all for the Goodwin family, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, have they taken $1 in profit out of this community in the days that they've owned it? No, if you didn't hear Steve, the answer is no, they haven't. They're a long-term player. They're a family organization who loves this community as much as we do, and they are our partners. I mentioned why we settled at 0.75%. They've got a good argument for why it's a 0.5%. When the residents owned it prior to the resort buying it, when it was owned by a number of residents here, they paid a 0.5%. So there's a long history of that, and to bring that issue up and beat it to death is really not of any value. We came up with a reasonable compromise. We'll split the difference. We'll go to 0.75. The resort gets nothing back for that except the acknowledgement that it is 0.75 and we could take the issue off the table. So I think that's a good deal for us. I think we gain a tremendous amount from what the resort has. If they were just in it for a profit, and maybe we can convince them that they shouldn't be here and we'll sell it to some hedge fund and they can show you what an organization looks like who only runs it for their own interests.
Thanks, Charlie. Amanda? Or should I go to one?
If you have one, sure.
Yeah, George?
Yeah, my name is George Paletta, 110 Club Course Drive. I'd like to get a copy of the storm and hydraulic survey. I think that's very important, and see what that engineer projected for future expenses, number one. And number two is I'd like to know why we are so far behind. Has our board been bad management? Has the management of the CSA been poor, or a lack of interest? Because we're talking about 6 or 7 or 8 years of malfeasance in the operation. The other thing is that, which we're trying to catch up with now, not talking about anything else but what's on the table. Don't anybody get any other ideas. We're just talking about why we have been so far behind, and that's a fair question. The other thing is what I don't like is when you play with percentages. 50% sounds great. Just give us the facts. Don't play with the percentages. They don't work. Okay, the other part is the increase is never going to go away because you're going to turn it over to the CPI. So therefore, this is an ongoing and maybe very necessary, but it's not going away. It's not a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year program. It's ad infinitum. Okay, and the other part that we have here is just one other aspect, is we now have hired a full-time monitor. And the word is that we're looking for a job for the part-time manager when we can be saving whatever we paid him. So I don't think that we ought to be spending that kind of money. And as a matter of fact, to raise more income, why don't we have an A tax on the rentals in Sea Pines? Why don't we have an A tax on the rentals? Thank you.
Well, I'll try to take a few of those. The last would require a referendum. That's one. We can't tax the community at will. So, and I don't believe the community would necessarily support that, with 60% of our community being in the short-term rental business. In terms of hydrology study, that is available. Contact Sandra and she'll direct you to Sandra or to, Victoria. It's a very substantial study. From memory, the engineering analysis suggested that we were going to be exposed to something upwards of $1.5 million a year in the cost of proper maintenance and replacement of the stormwater system over the next, I think it was 30 years. And then in terms of, does this go away? No, this doesn't go away. 150, 150, 150, still subjected to CPI. When you get to, and this is in the book that was sent out, when you get to 2020, I believe that your assessment, my assessment, will be just slightly above $1,500, assuming CPI continues about at the same pace it has historically. And that's still going to cause us to be positioned as the second lowest assessment on this island. In terms of opinions about how the CSA spends its funds and its resources, I have no comment. I think that this board and the finance committee and our administration are highly sensitive to doing the right thing. Lastly, why didn't this happen before? I've been on this board for 6 years. I don't believe there's anybody sitting here on this that's been around, perhaps other than some of the resort and commercial directors that's been here for 6 years. And I can't speak for why a former board, 6 years passed, and the then administration didn't do the right thing. All I can tell you is we've rolled up our sleeves. We've hired the professionals to do the analysis. We've hired the horticulturists to look at our trees. We understand the way forward, and that's why we're asking you to reach in your pocket and fund what this community needs over the coming years. Yeah, Charlie reminds me, and I might add that I believe it's a little over 10 years ago, 2008, there was a referendum that was brought before the community and only received 71% support. So life might have been a bit different had that succeeded. And I'm going to let John go ahead since he was.
No, I would like to respond to the gentleman's question about why was nothing done in the past. The reason it was not done, we had a referendum to have a transfer fee on our property so that not only the current members or property owners would be contributing to what we need to maintain and make up for deterioration of our infrastructure, we also involve the future owner who has an opportunity to excel by paying the transfer fee. The objection there from our property owners was, oh, well, he'll never pay that. We'll have to pay that as the owner. The point is, it was there. It is a negotiating point. It could even be used to help sell your property. Now, relative to why haven't we done anything on it, that referendum, 2008, 71% of the property owners that voted approved it. 4% didn't. The 4%, guess who they were? They are the same type group who are against almost every time we want to do something in Sea Pines that advances the interest of all. They too were focused on the fact they do not like having the visitors. They do not like the renters. They do not like the resort. We still almost passed it. That is a very small minority. I am hopeful that those of you who have listened to them and their negative attitude, I am hoping you will not be influenced by them. That is not in the best interest of our plantation. Please support it.
Thank you, John. Mike 2, Christopher.
Christopher Cliff. I'd just like to say that thank goodness for visitors, whether they be a day visitor or a weekly visitor, otherwise we'd be in seriously financial difficulties, much worse than we are. I'd like to ask the board to consider looking again at the new guest pass building. You refer quite often to the 2015 survey. Well, we all know that's more or less 4 years ago. We've lived here since 2001, full-time, all year round. We don't vacate during the summer. And in our opinion, the traffic coming through the gate has got better and easier to manage. And the last couple of years, some of the innovations that the board has introduced seem to be proving successful. I've also had, provided by Victoria, thank you, all the gate pass data going back to 2009, I believe. You might wonder whether I've got nothing else better to do. Anyway, I've actually analyzed all that data. Most of it is by month. And the conclusion you reach up until and including the first quarter 2019, January that is, the best you can say about the number of vehicles coming to the gate, it's flatlining. If in many cases, it's actually declining. The vehicles coming to the gate is not increasing, it's flatlining. You can look at gate passes for the inn, Seapine's front desk, short-term weekly visitors, daily pass, whatever category you look at, it's flatlining. So you are having some successes. So I'd like to ask, the money that you're suggesting to go on the new gate pass facility be diverted to some critical infrastructure items. That's a request. My second comment, if you don't mind, sorry to take so much time, is over the past, the regular comments from the board is we want all stakeholders to contribute more to the future. In the resolutions passed on Friday, the resolutions passed again today, and in the brochure that we received, or some of us received, there is no mention of any changes to the easements. Now the resort, sorry, I beg your pardon, the CSA has substantial easement income. Grand Ocean, Monarch, Heritage, the Marriott, the Country Club, Hargrave. It's a substantial amount of money, but there's no indication in the projections in the document or what Brett's shown today that they'll be asked to make an increased contribution. And I think when you look at the benefits they receive, then I think they should also be asked to put their hand in the pocket as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher.
Question from the webinar. This is from a property owner over on Governor's Road. I'm not yet a full-time property owner as the majority of as is the majority of Seapine's property owners. Since the majority of our owners are not full-time residents and their votes are needed to pass this critical referendum, what special communications are going to be sent to encourage that these owners engage and vote yes?
Well, Amanda, maybe you'd like to expand on that.
I will, absolutely. So as Mark and Brett mentioned, this mailer was sent to all of our property owners' notice of mailing addresses. If you, for some reason, were not at your notice of mailing address and would like to get a copy sent to you, please reach out to us at info@csacpines.com. Additionally, we are working to continue to communicate this information about the critical needs referendum to all owners. So if we mail something to somebody who's a local resident in Hilton Head, we'd also would mail that to their notice of mailing if they're out of state or out of country as well. So we're trying to get the same message to everybody so we can get that yes vote. So we encourage you to take a look at that stuff that we sent.
Well, the one thing I would also add that may help, the CSA board, when it met on Friday, also put in place a new standing committee. It was on that schedule that I referenced earlier, called Get Out the Vote. Larry Moshvin has agreed to chair that committee. I believe his roster right now is around 37 volunteers of residents in the community. We hope that'll end up being larger at some point. But their objective and Larry's objective is to, by telephone, reach out to every single property owner between now and the latter part of May, after ballots have gone out, for one sole purpose: to make sure that they are aware that there is a referendum and that their ballot is important and that they cast it and get it in. After a couple weeks' time, I think they will shift because Elliot Davis, who will be handling the recording of this ballot, we're going to be able to know who of you have turned your ballot in and who has not. And we will continue to be making phone calls to those that have not submitted a ballot. So there is an active action out there to ensure that all residents who have an opportunity to vote do in fact vote. Over here.
My name is Sarah Gleaton. I'm on Otter Road, and my question is probably moot. I should have gotten up first, but my husband and my family, we ride our bikes all the time. We're in Club Course area. There are no bike paths. It can be a little disconcerting on occasion. A couple of times I've had members come out of the Sea Pines entrance, the club entrance, yelling at me and shaking their hand at me because I'm riding in the street. Now, I know that 90,000 reserve is not going to go towards putting bike paths in the club course area as much as I would love it. But if you could at least somehow send out some sort of an email or something to ask members and people in club course to please be patient with bikers. I know more like riding in the street, my husband doesn't, than anyone else. And majority of the bike paths are in the visitor, area. So I would appreciate if that could be addressed, as minor a situation as that is, or issue. But I wouldn't mind that reserve money going toward bike path too.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have another one, Amanda?
Question from the webinar. I want level playing field for property owners that use resort to rent properties. The resort doesn't own the properties, owners do, so they should not be allowed to pay the gate fee. That should be changed in this referendum.
With all due respect, I understand the comment, I understand the question. This has been looked at exhaustively, and it's not a topic of this referendum. And it is a right that the resort has, and we just need to accept that. Sorry.
I'm Dennis Meyer, 23 Oyster Landing Lane. Linda and I have been Sea Pines property owners since 1991. I think it's appropriate at this time that you hear a voice in appreciation of what the board has done and the decision that it is making to address the critical needs of our community. We're voting for the referendum. Virtually all of our neighbors and friends, we think, are as well. And the reasons for that are many. But fundamentally, we and our neighbors believe very strongly in the competence, in the dedication, and the integrity of our board members. And we know that they have done their homework. We know that they have worked diligently and have considered all alternatives that are possible. And we respect their judgment in coming up with this decision and their good faith in doing so. One thing that has, let me just say also, with respect to the resort, surely we'd like them to pay more. Surely we'd like them to pay 1%. But do I, as a lawyer, think that the compromise that has been reached is fair and reasonable? Absolutely. There's no question of that in my mind, at least, as someone who has practiced and litigated many cases over many years. One thing that has not been mentioned at this point, but I think needs to be mentioned, is that we at least consider the fact that we have had fees of about $1,000 a year for many years. And at least to our mind, given the environment and the many amenities to which we have access, that we have had one hell of a bargain here for a long, long time. And we think that both in absolute and relative terms, increasing that over a 3-year period to about $1,500, we'll still have one hell of a bargain. So we would urge our fellow neighbors, our friends, to vote in favor of the referendum. We know we have a huge hurdle. The biggest problem we have is that we have an extraordinary supermajority that we have to overcome. That means we need 3 out of every 4 voters to vote in favor of this referendum. And that's a hard task. It's especially hard because we know we have a hard core of vocal opponents who, frankly, I believe, decided, committed to be negative even before they knew the terms of the referendum.
Thank you. Amanda?
Question from the webinar. I'm a new owner as of 2019. I've been coming in Sea Pines multiple times for years, for over 10 years. We've loved this community since the first day we stepped foot on the island. The investments in the community and amenities, along with our love of Sea Pines community, are why we chose to become owners with the intentions of becoming full-time residents in the near future. We absolutely support the referendum. Even as brand new owners, please vote yes, and let's continue to invest in our wonderful community. So there is not a question in that, but did want to read it.
Thank you.
Yes, want to make sure everybody gets heard. One other, excuse me, just going through my list. Give me 1 second. That one is done. Lots of logistics over here, folks. So next question. There was a sign in the middle of the lanes at the gate on Greenwood during the Heritage. That seemed to work very well. Can we get the sign back permanently? Toby.
I am assuming they're talking about the sign that gets pushed forward out on Greenwood Drive, trying to ensure that visitors get themselves into the proper lane. And I do agree that I think that has worked. And I'm assuming, Toby, that through the summer and some of the very, very accelerated times that strategy will continue to be used. And in fact, one of the reconfiguration concepts that I talked about on the Greenwood Drive corridor also includes moving forward, leaving the gate where it is, but moving forward a location in which an officer could actually, a gate representative could actually man to assist in getting residents and drivers in the right lane until such time as we've got a proper acceleration and deceleration. Part of the problem is somebody comes off Office Park Road, you've got maybe 2 car lengths to get yourself into the lane, one of those 2 lanes. And if you happen to be a visitor who figures out that he's in the left lane, he really needs to be in the right lane and decides to just stop, then all of a sudden we have a mess on our hands. So those are all things that is a part of this reconfiguration of that corridor. We have it in traffic engineering studies that we expect to correct.
Good.
Is that a conclusion?
That is. Not for me. I have some more, but I see Derek over there.
Or Diederik,
my name is Diederik Advocaat, 55 Deer Run Lane. I had a question with regard to the actual language of the referendum, the more detailed language, and when do you anticipate that becoming available to?
Well, we spoke about that this morning in ASPO's board meeting. The original plan, it's been approved by the resort, it's been approved by CSA, it's been approved by ASPO. It will absolutely go in the ballot package when it mails. Okay. The suggestion at ASPO this morning was, since it is final, is there any reason that we shouldn't go ahead and post it and make it available to the community? And I think that's where we're headed.
Okay. And second question I had, the rights of the homeowners in the gate agreement, can you assure the homeowners here that those rights are not going to be diluted in any way?
I don't know what you're referencing. Could you expand on that question?
Let me rephrase it then. The gate agreement is going to remain as it is and has no bearing on this.
There is absolutely nothing that is a part of this referendum that has anything at all to do with a gate agreement. The gate agreement that was executed last July remains as it is.
Thanks.
Yes. Sir.
Afternoon, Stuart Silver, Pine Island Road. Has anyone considered or done any research to determine whether some of the opposition is from people that frankly can't afford the extra $150, or is it assumed that everybody can? And if there are some people that can you make any kind of a provision where people might be able to pay that quarterly or something like that? I don't know the facts. I'm just curious, sitting here listening, that there must be some folks here that may not be able to afford that.
All at once. I don't know the makeup, nor do I know the substance of the opposition. I do know that they're very loud. I've never heard the opposition say the problem is I represent constituents that can't afford it. I do know that when we enacted the special assessment for Matthew, which doubled the assessment for that year, there were residents who had some stress, and they were invited to come in, sit down, and work out a payment plan. So if there are residents that are on fixed incomes and quite frankly, have no ability to meet this obligation, we can have a conversation.
That's my only point.
Yeah.
If there's an obstacle to 5% of the voters because they can't afford it, if you can just find a way to address that, you got 5% more of a vote that I indeed support. So
I agree.
thank you.
I just haven't seen that. I don't know about anyone else. Go.
Question from the webinar. In terms of looking for additional ways to generate infrastructure revenue, could CSA start charging a fee to ride the trolley? When riders purchased a ticket, couldn't CSA put a general liability waiver on the ticket as a condition to ride?
Well, over the years, there have been task forces and committees of finance that has looked at the services that CSA provides and whether we could charge for some of the services that we could provide. And it really came down to its assessments, its gate, and its transfer fee. Well, you take transfer fee off the table at a half a point, that's $1 million. At a quarter point, obviously it's about $500,000. So we take that off the table. Could we start charging y'all for mulch? Could we eliminate yard waste pickup? No. Those are things that I don't want to have to deal with, and Brett certainly doesn't want to have to deal with. But if we don't have funds, we don't have funds. So those are all things that have been considered, but have said we don't want to compromise service. We want the service levels that we have today, and we want to take care of our community. So hopefully that's helpful.
Next question from the webinar from property owner. If we are in such dire straits with our internal infrastructure, how could we possibly spend $1.4 million on the gallery of shops without commitment from the state to improve Sea Pine Circle?
I don't have any idea what acquisition of a $1.4 million eyesore with the intent that it solve a gate issue that we have and a traffic issue has anything to do with the state of South Carolina. I don't really know how to respond to that.
We have, I believe, one more question. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to go through these. Okay. This is a question from property owner Marsh. Cars versus bikers. Has anyone brought up during the meeting the cars versus bikers issue? I was following a resident on Plantation Drive recently after the recent incident on Plantation near the exact same location. The car had made a sudden stop, not even where there was a crosswalk. A biker hadn't even arrived yet. They were waiting for the biker, and I politely beeped at them that they should keep going. They exited Sea Pines Greenwood Gate. They stopped again, but the point is that there was a sudden, excuse me. This is a very long one. Sorry. Let's see. Basically just asking, could you please clarify the Greenwood exit bike path and right-of-ways to our attendees at the meeting and on the call? Sorry, that was a very long introduction.
The last part of the question?
Asking for clarification on who has right-of-way related to bikers versus driving in a vehicle.
Well, in Sea Pines,
yes,
the vehicles have the right-of-way. If I'm not mistaken, at the moment, at every one of our crossings, there are stop signs asking the bicyclists to stop. I believe there are brochures that are provided to the rental community that are advising them on the biking rules. So that being said, if a biker is in the crosswalk, you got to stop. You don't get to hit them. But currently that's the, and always has been, the policy of bike crossings, leisure trail crossings here in Sea Pines.
Okay, a couple more over here. Do you want to go to mic 1?
Nope.
Okay. Question from the webinar. How much did the brochure cost to create, print, and mail?
Okay, I expected that. In 2019, fall of 2018, when the 2019 budget was approved for CSA, there was a line item for $25,000 to handle the administration. That was the potentially, at that point, we didn't know exactly what we were going to be doing, but that's printing costs, mailing costs, hiring Elliot Davis to handle the certification. If I'm not mistaken, the cost of producing and mailing that brochure to over 5,200 residents was $10,000. That's $2. So we spent $2 per resident of your money so we could educate you.
Okay. Have a follow-up question from the webinar. This is from property owner Leanne Lee. A statement of support for the CSA and ASPPPO boards and the CSA staff. We strongly appreciate all the efforts made on behalf of the tri-parties, property owners, commercial, and resort. A small but very loud group is very focused on standing in the way of getting a yes vote for this referendum. Please support your elected board members and vote yes.
Thank you. All right, we will adjourn to the pool deck. Thank you all for coming. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
No problem.